recording started.
Hello, this is Dr. Kessler. This is Lecture 2, Strategic Planning. This lecture has two parts. First, I'd like to cover the strategic planning process, and then I'd like to dig into the first couple of steps of that process as well. The first part about the process, we're going to define strategic planning, discuss the traditional strategic planning process, bring up flaws that we've mentioned in the first lecture about how that traditional process unfolds, and revise it just a bit. We're going to discuss a concept that I believe plagues many organizations called doing activities and hoping for results, as opposed to an alternative way of planning and managing called managing for results. And we're going to talk about strategic planning and its role as a change agenda. So let's define strategic planning. It's a systematic process. Anytime you have a systematic process, you go through a series of steps through which an organization agrees on priorities essential to its mission and responsive to its environment. It guides acquisition and allocation of resources to achieve those priorities. It doesn't start with IT issues. It doesn't start with people issues. It doesn't start with money issues. It starts with mission issues and reason for existence issues. It involves choosing how to best respond to the external world in terms of what the organization is positioned to do. And it calls for a process that's structured and data-based. It also involves choosing priorities. You can't always do all things that need to be done. It involves building a commitment from stakeholders of the organization, those external to the organization, and also those who are in the organization. And it guides all of the acquisition and deployment and use of resources that an organization does over the strategic horizon. So here's a fairly busy diagram. It's a series of phases. This is taken from a textbook called Strategic Planning in the Nonprofit Sector. I use this diagram. It's very representative of most diagrams in most textbooks. It has a series of phases. And the first phase is to get ready for strategic planning, and we'll talk about that in the next part. The second phase, according to the diagram, is to articulate the mission, values, and vision. Well, let me assume that most organizations who are doing strategic planning already have mission, vision, and values, or at least de facto, even if not written down. And so spending time on something that you already know doesn't always seem to be the best use of resources, but that phase does need to get done. Phase 3 is called assess your situation, and you'll hear me argue in a few minutes that phases 2 and 3 should be reversed, because I believe once you assess your situation, you can then test and check your mission and vision to see how they measure up against the situation. But you can't do that if you've already passed that phase. Phase 4 is to agree on priorities. That means setting goals and objectives as outcomes, setting strategies to achieve the goals and objectives, and defining ways to measure the performance and the progress in achieving the goals and objectives. Phase 5 is write the plan. Phase 6 is to implement the plan. And phase 7 is to evaluate and monitor progress in terms of implementation. So those are the 7 typical phases, and I use this particular diagram, and you can see details below for each of the little boxes that we just discussed. So these are the phases, as I just mentioned. Get ready. What do we want to achieve? What steps will we follow? Who's going to be involved? How long is it going to take us to get this plan written? And then what are we going to do after we write it? Phase 2 is to articulate the mission, vision, values. Are we doing the right things? Is our mission the right vision? Sorry, is our mission the right mission? Phase 3 is to assess your situation. And I'm going to argue and actually change in the next part of this lecture. Phase 2 and 3, I'm going to flip them around. Phase 3 says assess your situation, what factors are influencing our success and our mission and our existence. 4 is agreeing on priorities. That's getting the goals and the objectives, strategies and performance measures in place, writing the plan, implementing the plan, and then evaluating and monitoring implementation progress. Phase 1, get ready. More details here. This is a critical phase. Senior leadership has to communicate total support for a strategic planning initiative that will yield useful results. We need to make sure that we're clear with senior leadership in terms of what we want to achieve. We need to agree in phase 1 of the steps that we're going to follow, and of course we're going to get into that in detail. Who's going to be involved? Sometimes I've seen the senior leadership, the CEO or the head of the agency not participate. Other times I've seen them participate actively. So you just have to figure out who's going to be involved. The senior leadership, stakeholders, direct customers, beneficiaries, sister agency representatives, middle management, technical experts, who's going to be participating and what will be their roles in the strategic planning, development, and implementation. And over what time frame? What's our schedule for getting strategic plan in place? Phase 2 is articulate mission, vision, and values. Mission statement communicates what you do and why you do it. Vision statement is it has to be forward-looking and specific. It has to present an image and words of what success looks like and how we'll know when we get there. It's not a altruistic statement of help the world. It's a statement of by 2020, 20% fewer people will live in poverty or whatever. It's very specific. Values are the things that the organization wants to emphasize as it conducts its business. Phase 3 is assess the situation, extremely important phase. Soon, it's going to become phase 2 for us. We're going to assess the situation. We're going to conduct a clear-eyed, aggressive, no-nonsense assessment of the challenges facing the organization, whether the organization's on the right track, whether what it does actually is having value, whether the world wants something different than what the organization does, and so on and so forth. Most textbooks talk about this in the context of a SWOT analysis. I mentioned in Lecture 1 why SWOT analysis is problematic, because you can spend a lot of time on it and not have something useful. So we won't necessarily get caught up in just doing SWOT. We were going to get more caught up in doing something that's very practical in terms of discussing the major issues facing the organization. And if it helps you to understand them as opportunities and threats, that's fine. But we're not going to hold ourselves just to the SWOT acronym. Information gathered from both internal and external stakeholders about perceptions and expectations constitute an important part of a situational assessment. And as I said here, the organizations are wise if they reverse phase 2 and 3. Don't do the mission and vision until you first assess the situation. Phase 4 is agreeing on priorities. Once we know what the situation is, we've done the mission and vision, we can really get down to looking at the goals we want to achieve, which will be stated as outcomes, and they're broken down into objectives, the strategies to achieve them, and how to measure progress in achieving them. Just recognize that this phase 4 is where you spend a lot of your time and effort, because it is the things that the organization is going to do over the next 3 to 5 to 7 years. It's a big deal. Phases 5 through 7, write the plan, implement the plan, evaluate and monitor. Problems with the process, already hinted at this. 2 major issues. One is that the situational assessment really should be done before we validate the mission, vision, values, unless you're a brand new organization. But most organizations we work with generally exist and have mission, visions, and values. And so we don't need to kind of spend a ton of time on that until at least we've done the situation. We've taken account of what we're facing as an organization. Then we can ask ourselves, is this mission and vision the right mission and vision for going forward? For phase 3, for the situational assessment, the SWOT can get you in trouble. You can have people spend lots of time writing strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats on the walls. Your strengths will always be your people. Your weaknesses will always be your lack of money. Opportunities and threats will be sort of hit and miss. So we need to make sure that we approach this in a very comprehensive way, that we create a team and we put the team to work on coming up with the challenges facing the organization. And we don't need to label those challenges. We need to identify them. We need to look in the past. Why is that program put in place? And when was it put in place? And what were the key issues then? Poverty or illness or crime or whatever. Selling cars, making cars, etc. We need to look at the present. What's going on right now that is impacting us? Is it passage of the Affordable Care Act? Is it changes in consumer tastes? Is it economic conditions and factors? Is it the price of gasoline? What is it? And then we need to also take time and look at what's likely to occur in a year and 2 years and 3 years and 4 years down the road. Maybe demographic shift, right? Baby boomers retiring, or whatever. And so the situational assessment is really kind of key, and we need to make sure that that is the first thing we do when we start strategic planning. I've got lots of examples, but not a lot of time. But you can see these public sector organizations and how they approach their situational assessment. It's an externally oriented activity or initiative. So if you're the National Credit Union Administration, credit unions, you're going to look at what's going on with credit unions. If you're the Federal Bureau of Investigation, you investigate crime, so you need to look at what's going on with crime. If you're the National Cancer Institute, cancer is in your title, so you're going to look at what's going on with cancer. If you're the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, you're going to look at space and space exploration and space type initiatives. If you're the Department of Interior, you're going to look at the nation's interior, its natural and historical assets. And so we'll talk more about this topic as we go along. We'll get into more detail fairly soon. You need to analyze very specific issues in your external environment. Number of travelers is doubling, leading to delays and congestion, increasing accidents and fatalities. This requires more roads, and therefore it has implications for what we do as an organization. So situational assessment is critical. It will set up the stage for the analysis necessary to create goals, objectives, strategies, and the change agenda for the organization. Just one last topic in part one of lecture one. We often find organizations and people, and this could be true in their personal lives as well as their professional lives, that do activities and hope for results. That they show up for work, they do their work, they go home at the end of the day, and that they hope that they're well-intentioned people, but that they hope that the organization is having some impact. So it's kind of like, I'm going to do my work, we know what we do, we're going to get this done, we do the same things over and over, we count and report how many things we do each week, each month, even each year. We prepare the budget. Budget for next year is going to look a lot like the budget for this year. Our emphasis is on keeping our processes moving forward, everybody doing their job and doing it in an excellent way. And yet this organization is just on autopilot. And if the world changes, this organization may not be prepared to change with the world. It's a reactive organization where managers ensure that their organization does more and more activities, does them quicker, does them better, and they hope that these activities lead to results or outcomes. There's not a clear distinction or a clear connection. There's a lot of hope. And that's when you work in an organization where you do activities and you hope for results. The alternative approach is to be able to identify the result you want to achieve and then to devote every activity in the organization to achieving those results. And that's called managing for results. And in this approach, we have to really identify what we mean by results. And that's not that easy to do. What outcomes must be achieved? Now, a lot of people don't want to do this because they say, well, I can't reduce poverty. There's too many other things other than my agency or my company working on that issue. And so I don't want to get in trouble and therefore I only want to measure the number of activities that we do that hopefully, maybe, will reduce poverty. And so there's a lot of psychological stuff that goes with managing for results. But in reality, the best managers are those who say, we're going to do something. And if it doesn't get done, we'll explain why, but we're really going to try hard to get it done. We're going to reduce violent crime. We're going to reduce homelessness. We're going to increase math and science test scores. We're going to make sure that every driver in America drives an electric car, battery-operated car. This is what Elon Musk at Tesla might say he's going to achieve by 2018. And so you can sort of see this concept of managing for results is where we get our great leaders and our great organizations because they really are driving an organization to achieve something fairly specific. So keep that in mind as we go through the course. Doing activities and hoping for results, or are we managing for results? Last point, strategic planning is about change. It's really any strategic plan where the goals are to continue to do what we continue. If that's the first word in the goal, it's a bad goal because it's a goal that no one's going to pay any attention to. It's basically don't have a plan if you just want to keep doing what you're doing. Just kind of have somebody write up something and get it published, and you can say you have a strategic plan. But if you're serious about strategic planning, you're going to use it as a process to say where do we need to get to, and how well are we positioned to get there. And so we're going to take what we want to achieve, and we're going to use the strategic planning process to get us there. And so recognize that strategic planning sometimes doesn't work the way it's supposed to because there are managers who don't really want to go someplace different because they're fairly comfortable with where they are, and they're going to retire soon, maybe. And also, if we have a lot of change, I may lose some of my people or some of my area, and so there's a lot of resistance to real strategic planning, and you just need to be aware of that. So recognize that strategic planning forces the organization to face harsh realities and start pushing, pulling, and shifting programs, resources, people, and processes in order to achieve some very specific desired future outcomes. It's the end of Lecture 1, Part 1. And I'll continue with Lecture 1, Part 2 in a bit. I'm going to break at this point just to keep these files that I upload to YouTube in a reasonable size. But I'll continue Lecture 1 with Part 2. And in Part 2, what we'll do is we'll discuss the first couple of phases. First one is getting ready, and the second one, which we're going to use, is doing a situational assessment. So we'll get into that in a minute. What did we cover in Part 1? We talked about what strategic planning is. It's really a systematic process to make sure the organization is managing for results, that it's focused on where it wants to go, and that it has goals, strategies, and measures to cause it to get there. And implementing it, writing a plan is one thing, and then implementing it's the next hard thing. We talked about the traditional strategic planning process, and then we talked about the flaw in the process, which is that mission, vision, values before situational assessment. So we came back and we revised our approach in this course for strategic planning, because what we really want to do is get ready and then do a situational assessment, and then come back and look at the mission, vision, values, and then set out the results we want to achieve in terms of goals and objectives, and then develop the strategies and performance measures to cause that to happen. We talked also about doing activities and hoping for results, which many organizations do, especially old and large organizations, ones that have been around for a long time and are large, versus managing for results. When you have a leader who comes in and says, look, on my watch, we're going to get some things done, and here's specifically what needs to get done, and here's how we're going to measure that, and here's what we're going to get done, and that's managing for results. And then finally, the last point in Part 1, strategic planning. You have to really appreciate its role as a driver of organizational change.